This is I Don't Speak German. I'm Jack Graham, he, him, and in this podcast, I talk to my friend Daniel Harper, also he, him, about what he learned from years of listening to today's Nazis, white nationalists, white supremacists, and what they say to each other when they don't think we're listening. Be warned, this is difficult subject matter. Content warnings always apply. Okay, so it's the third bonus episode of IDSG, which, for the benefit of people listening potentially in the future, we're recording on the 22nd of March. At least it's the 22nd for me. It might be the 21st for Daniel. I don't know how that whole time thing works. And it's
timey-wimey, as they say on the BBC. I just imagine anytime time is mentioned on the BBC, it is pronounced timey-wimey. I think that's me as an American. That's how I believe things work on the BBC. So,
yeah, well, sadly it is these days. There you go. There was a time when the BBC used to make decent shows, but now you just get David Tennant to say something stupid, and the entire internet loves it, so they don't bother making good stuff.
Yeah.
The whole anyway, BBC, that's a very old grudge.
The whole of the BBC is just written by Stephen Moffat, which would explain Boris Johnson, I think. But we don't have to go there. It's fine.
Yeah. We're talking about another movie. We're talking about Bob Roberts from, I believe this was released in 1992.
Yeah, a couple of months before the 1992 election.
Yeah. And written and directed by Tim Robbins, starring a pretty amazing cast, to be honest, which we'll probably talk about a little bit. And it's what they call a mockumentary, isn't it? It's a pseudo documentary, very much like Punishment Park, actually, although quite different as well in many ways.
Very, very many ways. Yes, partially inspired by This Is Spinal Tap from 1984. But
yeah, which I've never seen. So
yeah,
it's another one. There's quite a lot of those sort of cultural touchstone movies that I've never seen for some reason. I've never seen Spinal Tap or The Princess Bride or Terminator 2. Loads of them. So basically, I don't understand Twitter.
Yeah, or The Simpsons. You've never been a fan of The Simpsons, I think, is the big the big thing that prevents you from understanding Twitter.
Yeah, barely seen any Simpsons. And I think the total amount of Buffy the Vampire Slayer I ever saw was about 8 minutes. So, yeah, I'm lost, really, in today's world.
Yes. No, that's pop culture. I have not seen even the Joss Whedon cut of the of Justice League, and I don't plan to watch the Snyder cut either. So I'm just being left behind by pop culture as we speak.
Yeah, I've never seen that either. Left behind, but I have seen the Joss Whedon. Should we? Let's not talk about this.
I was gonna do a joke about. I was gonna do a joke about the movie we're doing this week is, of course, the Snyder cut, and then we got completely lost with all of that. But it's fine.
Well, it's the Snyder cut of Bob Roberts, isn't it? It's
Actually, I was thinking like a one of those like 30 years later sequels would be really relevant for Bob Roberts, which I think we can get into. So
yeah, that would be a good idea, wouldn't it? Bob Roberts today. What's he doing now? I imagine he's a diehard Trumpist, but. I don't know. Maybe he'd be. It just feels a bit weird, doesn't it? Trying to transplant the satire from the 90s into actual events of the present day, because I think, as this is a flawed movie, I would say, but it's very, very prescient. But again, like a lot of things, it looks pretty mild compared to what actually happened.
Well, the thing is that this was made in 1992, and I actually found an interview that Tim Robbins did in last year in 2020, talking about this, and it's full of some kind of interesting tidbits, and we can read some of it as things that he's saying in 2020 about the thing that he did in 1992. But it is clear from his talking about it that it was based on, he basically was sort of like planning this in as early as 1985. And so it speaks very much more to kind of late 80s, early 90s politics than it does to later eras. But this movie was made 4 years before Fox News was even a thing, because Fox News doesn't get started until 1996. And so it is this kind of little time capsule, right? It is this kind of like this moment in history. And I've long thought that, like, 1992, there is a sense in which what we need to do is talk about U.S. electoral politics as sort of the long 1992. And the fact that this movie happened to come out in that year is almost an accident, because it has very little to say to that moment, but everything to say to sort of the context around it, right? So yeah, it's interesting.
Yeah, 92, of course, was the election that saw George Bush 1 become a one-term president. And Bill Clinton was elected, although how much of that is down to Ross Perot splitting the right-wing vote is arguable, I suppose. I wouldn't want to comment on that, because I don't know off the top of my head whether Clinton would have been elected without Ross Perot in the mix.
I long believed
you probably do.
I long believed that Ross Perot was the thing that allowed Bill Clinton to be elected. I have seen some polling data, and there are some very clever political scientists talking, decades after the fact, that, like, looking at like if you look at the data, Perot did kind of take equally from both candidates, and so, maybe it's kind of a wash, but, like, it is important that Perot was in that campaign at that time, in terms of, like, it is a important political moment, in the sense that it shaped the way the campaign was run, even though it may not have affected this sort of eventual results. Anyway, that's completely beside the point of us talking about this movie, which there's a lot to talk about in the movie, so we should do that.
So where would you like to start? Do you have an angle you'd like to start with?
I don't know. We should talk a little bit about the movie itself, I think. I mean, we don't tend to do that on these, but I mean, you kind of said, like, prescient, but, like, kind of fatally flawed, and I sort of agree with that. I saw this, I don't know, sometime in the early 2000s. I rented the DVD or whatever and watched it for the first time, or maybe I caught it on, like, Turner Classic Movies. Not Turner Classic Movies at that point, but it would have been like Encore, one of the paid cable channels, one of the, like, kind of basic cable channels. I
rented this from a video rental store,
sure,
pretty much as soon as it was possible to do, because that was the kind of 16-year-old I was.
Sure.
I'm afraid to have to tell you.
Sure, but I was younger, because I'm a few years younger than you, and I was not old enough to know this movie existed. Although I was very interested in the 92 election when I was 12. But did not know this movie existed, and didn't really discover it until I was kind of reading about it a few years later. So I'm pretty sure I caught this on, like, IFC, the Independent Film Channel, had, like, a free preview or something like that a few years later, and I kind of caught it on and watched it in that format. And then probably watched it one or two times in the 20 years since then, and then decided we were going to do the podcast, and I watched it like 2.5 times in the last, like, 2 weeks, because that's typically how I prepare for these movie episodes, is just kind of rewatching the film a couple of times and kind of solidifying it in my mind, so that we have so that I have enough of a background to really have, like, things to say about it. And it's funny, like, in when I saw this in 2001 or whatever, 2002, it felt like, oh, this is a really really biting satire of the kind of political movement of that time period. Because I was in my early 20s. And like watching it now, it's like, man, this is like almost silly and naive in terms of its in terms of the reality of the politics behind it. But again, as you say, prophetic in a lot of ways. And I think I also find that just as a film, and I'll just kind of put this out here now, it's not much of a film in terms of having a beginning, a middle, and an end. It has a really fascinating premise. It really has some things to say, but I feel like it's often overstuffed and over-signified. Like the fact that like Tim Robbins as Bob Roberts has political campaign staff who are also day traders and working in a mobile van, and like it like puts its finger on like kind of the yuppie element, but like it would actually make more sense if he had two vans, one of which was the political operation and one of which was the day traders. The fact that they're the same people, like, I understand there's a budgetary constraint and I understand like what he's going for there, but it feels a little bit tone deaf to me. And I understand that might be like seen as like a nitpicky detail, but it also is like kind of that, like, it kind of brings me out of the satire a little bit to sort of like have that thought of like, well, no, they would be a separate thing. Like that's the whole like point is, the Bob Roberts character is kind of running this, Broken Dove program, which is simultaneously kind of funding the Iran-Contra affair and putting drugs into African-American neighborhoods in Pennsylvania. And those are two separate groups of people, right? And there's a duality there. And I feel like that could have been better represented by the film. But also, I kind of don't blame it because this is a super low-budget movie made as a passion project in like 1992. So, but that's just kind of one example of sort of like the tone-deaf sort of problems that I have with sort of the structure of the film. It's just a little too dense. I wish it did a little bit more with its premise.
Yeah, you've gestured to several of the points that I would want to make about the film's problems. I think partly what we have, this is Tim Robbins' first picture that he directed, and I think we have a touch of first novel syndrome about this, which is when somebody writes their first novel, they try to put everything in. It's a well-known thing,
Right.
They try to put all their ideas into the first novel, which I always find that very endearing.
It's super endearing. It's super endearing. Yeah, no, you're right. Yeah.
And it is, I mean, speaking as somebody who has been trying to write their first novel repeatedly pretty much his entire life, I get it. I really do. But I think this has a touch of that about it, doesn't it? Where he's trying to put everything into it. And kind of like the idea of having this Bob Roberts figure, it probably seemed like a real stroke of genius. I can have this figure who kind of contains everything I want to say,
Right.
about the problems with the American political system, and that's really what you get in the film. The film is, I mean, one of the problems with talking about it is that there's not really all that much to say in terms of explicating it or exegesis or anything like that, because the film just tells you, the film tells you exactly what's on its mind. It just says that, this, and this. Yeah, he wants to get it all in, So he wants to get like the national security state, CIA, drugs in inner city neighborhoods, the war on drugs generally, the cultural reaction against the 1960s, Wall Street day trading, as a lot of the things you mentioned. He kind of wants them all to be in there. And while there is a certain, there's something really spiky about the idea of this guy's campaign bus. Once you get inside there, it's like a miniature Wall Street trading floor. That's got a nice little, sharpness to it on the edge. You do nonetheless feel that it's all being crammed in together.
Well, and he's simultaneously a folk singer. So he's a politician, folk singer, day trader, self-made millionaire, quote unquote self-made millionaire, et cetera, et cetera.
Clearly, implied to be some kind of spook as well,
right?
Tied up with and that's it, really, isn't it? He's Tim Robbins is trying to say, I have an issue with this, and this. I have an issue with right-wing populist politics. I have an issue with the national security state. I have an issue with the war on drugs. I have an issue with Wall Street. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to talk about all of them, and I'm going to put them all in this one guy, which has a certain bravura quality to it. But it does make it feel overstuffed, I think, as you said.
It would make more sense if he was just a media personality, like not to blame Robbins for failing to understand the thing that was coming, right? But it would make more sense to see him not as a politician if he was just I'm a guy with a TV show, sort of like this alternate reality version of Network or something, in which he's a guy who has a TV show on one of the burgeoning cable networks in 1992, who is pushing this right-wing agenda, who's selling a bunch of albums and is pushing this right-wing agenda without actually being a politician at the same time, and almost muddies the water for him to be all of it at once, right?
Yeah. Another problem we have, relatedly, I think, with this movie is that it is a little uncertain in terms of, not exactly uncertain of its tone, because I think the tone is quite finely balanced and quite consistent all the way through. But in a way, the world building that the tone is based upon is a bit weird, because on one level you're being asked to absorb at certain points in the movie, and again, not in a particularly complex way, because it's just people telling you. It's just Gore Vidal or Giancarlo Esposito playing their characters, looking at the camera, telling you, because it's the documentary conceit. And that's fine, they're great actors, and it makes sense for their characters to be doing that. But at the same time, you are just being told. So it's not being told in a complex way, but you are being told quite complex things about America's national security state and about how the economy and the entire political system and media system is geared around essentially imperialism. The word isn't used, but that's what the film is getting at, whether it knows it or not. And so you're being asked to absorb quite a lot of this real world stuff, this quite tough and complex real world stuff, certainly for an audience, to a Hollywood comedy film. And at the same time, it all seems to be taking place in a world. I mean, the pastiches of Bob Dylan, they're very, very direct. The albums are called The Freewheelin' Bob Roberts, and there's a direct,
the times are changing back, which is
and it's funny. It's undoubtedly funny.
It's a great joke. But I love it. But yeah, you're right.
Does Bob Dylan exist in this universe?
No. I think that's so my thought is, of course Bob Dylan exists in this universe. This is the right wing, literally taking the iconography and using it to push their own agenda. I've always kind of seen it that way.
But absolutely. But you see what I mean about there being a problem of the film not being decided between metaphor and literalism there.
Right. No. I get that. Yeah.
And another problem I think this film has, which marks it very much as of its time, is the conspiratorial stuff, and that's part of the and which of course appealed to me at the time. As I say, when I first saw this, I was 16, and at the time I was a fan of Oliver Stone.
I mean, I think you can be a fan of Oliver Stone and not accept uncritically everything that Oliver Stone has to say. Talk radio is definitely on our list to cover in this series, for instance.
You absolutely can, and I would say in many ways I still am a fan of Oliver Stone without accepting everything, or indeed a great deal that he says. But at the time, when I was 16, I was pretty much an uncritical admirer of JFK, which is a movie you and I have talked about. And I thought, it's pretty much true, I expect, which I no longer believe, You're
right.
And I think this movie
you can also be an admirer.
Same year, doesn't it? 1992.
Yeah, wasn't JFK was in 91, I think.
Was it? Oh,
yeah,
it's roughly.
But it's
time.
It was released on Christmas Day of 91, I believe. So whatever. But sorry, I'm being pedantic. I'm being a pedantic asshole. That's just a thing that I'm doing. It's fine. Yeah.
That's you do you, Daniel. It's fine. But it was the 90s, and the 90s were the great sort of resurrection of the paranoid style in American culture. And because of course you have the X-Files just like a year or so down the road, I think, starting.
Yep. Mm-hmm.
I think it started 93, something like that.
That sounds right, yeah.
Oliver Stone's JFK. It becomes a big thing in the 90s. There's a really interesting, complex question about why that happens. I don't know if we want to get into that here, but it was a thing. And this movie very much takes part in it. And I mean, part of the problem there, I think, is, like you said, the film doesn't really have a story. So it tries to give itself a story, or at least a narrative, by giving you the figure of the dissident journalist, Bugs Raplin, played by the brilliant Giancarlo Esposito.
Yep.
And his being framed. It's clearly implied that he is framed and then assassinated by these people that are behind Bob Roberts. Framed for trying to assassinate Bob Roberts, which, again, it's clearly implied that's a fake, in a direct pastiche of the RFK assassination.
Yeah.
Bob Roberts is then, quote unquote, there's an assassination attempt, etc., etc. And again, it's funny, and it's part of, I think, Robbins trying to sort of cram everything in, but at the same time, it is a bit dated, and I think it does show you some of the naivety that you were talking about. Like, as you say, what actually happened in the end is that this happened 10 times worse and 10 times more ridiculous, and the guy wasn't, I mean, as far as we know anyway, backed by the CIA or the National Security State or anything like that. He was a game show host who had his position in life because he inherited loads of money from his father.
Sure. Yeah. Well, I mean, and not even talking about Trump, but, talking about the just the kind of the reality of politics at that time. I mean, it's interesting in the sense of, because I remember, some of my earliest political memories are reading Time magazine, which my family had a subscription to Time magazine. So I was, 12, 13 years old, reading Time magazine. And that was some of my first knowledge of politics. And, that probably explains a lot about my history in some complicated ways, right? That says a lot about just that was the thing that you had if you were the kind of educated consumer in 1992 talking about politics, kind of pre-internet. Yeah. It's not even about me. I mean, I was a kid. You can't blame me for accepting fairly uncritically the things I was reading at that time. But even at that time,
I do blame you. It's your fault.
Yeah, well, that's fine. You can do that. The Nazis certainly will. But there's an interesting kind of phenomenon in that, that was the moment in which I became politically aware, and that the way that the 92 primaries and the 92 kind of general election with Ross Perot kind of becomes this kind of staging ground for what we were going to see kind of down the line. And again, this is kind of the last piece of political media in a way that exists prior to that, because Robbins describes, and I have this interview that he did, which I will link to in the show notes, in which he describes this kind of process of kind of coming up with this. And Robbins spent 10 years as this kind of indie stage director doing live theater, rewriting the scripts and performing for, indie leftist audiences in various places. He was that's the thing he comes out of. And this movie kind of represents that, in which, you write the thing that you need to write, you put it out there, and you kind of take your criticism and then move on, right? It wouldn't be hard to imagine if they did a stage production of Bob Roberts, which was sort of this basic script, and then perform that for 3 months, kind of iterating on it, then they could kind of hone in on some of these details. But that was his process at the time. It's kind of weird looking at Tim Robbins' career, that he was that I think of him as this kind of big name actor, which he is, but he really only had about a 10-year kind of period as kind of a big name star. And then he kind of goes off to kind of do indie stuff. And that's interesting, right? That,
yeah, it is interesting. One thing I always find kind of a bit beside the point, but you're a fellow fan Orson Welles. So I always find there's a slight resonance between them, and because Orson as well started out doing, it wasn't indie theatre, but he started doing very innovative theatre. He did, of course, the so-called Voodoo Macbeth, and he did his anti-fascist Julius Caesar, which made him very famous, and then he sort of broke into movies and became a very big star and a wunderkind quite briefly, and then spent the rest of his hit career essentially trying to scrape together money to do basically what he was doing before he had his big break in Hollywood because of War of the Worlds and all that, except in films. He's the rest of his career after Kane is like him in exile trying to do what he was doing before on the stage in New York, later on in the cinema format. And it's interesting in that respect that Robbins goes on to direct a film about Wells putting on what's it called? I can't remember the musical, the radical musical that got because it was funded by the New Deal.
I know what you're talking about. I can't remember the title. I'm sorry. Cradle Will Rock.
No, it's all right.
No,
that's it. Cradle Will Rock. Yeah. And it's I think it's probably Robbins' best film, that for all its problems.
I haven't seen it, honestly. I mean, I haven't watched The Shawshank Redemption in a lot of years, and that's for deliberate reasons, because I love it and I'd rather not love it, if that makes sense.
I know what you mean. Yeah.
But I think this is one of his best performances, honestly. I think
he's very good in this. Yeah.
I mean, even beyond
the scene where he does the interview where he's talking to the documentary filmmaker, and he's just talking to him 10 to the dozen without pause, completely smooth, robotic, and smiling the whole time. It's chilling, because this guy is obviously meant to be a total sociopath,
right? I mean,
and he's just got it.
It's funny that like a lot of the history of this film, I was trying to get there, and then I kind of drifted off a little bit. No, it's fine. But the history of
my Orson.
No. We could talk. I've long thought that, like, if we didn't have to talk about Nazis, you and I could do both an Orson Welles podcast, just talking about various Orson Welles properties, but also like American electoral politics movie podcast. You and I'd be great at that. So Nazis, if you want to, if you want to make us broke, just stop doing what you're doing. Jack and I have plenty of other things we can talk about. It's fine.
Broker.
Yeah, broker, right.
Yeah.
Neither one of us are wealthy. We'll get to that at the end of the podcast.
Much rather talk, be alternating between like Cradle Will Rock and then Primary Colours and Chimes at Midnight and then The Candidate and then, I'd much rather be doing that.
Yeah, no. Yeah. And all those HBO like, electoral politics movies, Game Change and all that sort of thing. It would be great to sit and watch those. Despite the fact that they're mostly very bad. Anyway, Tim Robbins kind of comes up in the theater in the early 80s. His father is a folk singer, which I didn't know until I was researching for this podcast, and which explains a lot of Bob Roberts, right?
It does, rather, doesn't it?
And Tim Robbins' brother did a bunch of the music for this. So Tim Robbins is actually singing, but like the songs were written and like produced by Tim Robbins' brother. I think David Robbins is his name. But Tim Robbins left his home, left his New York neighborhood in 1980 to kind of go to Los Angeles and try to make it as a creative person. Comes back in 1985 and sees like, oh fuck, this whole neighborhood is gentrified. And that was kind of the genesis of this. He's like, I could see even at the time there's a McDonald's in the corner all of a sudden, and this is like the Reagan era. This is the SNL scandal. This is the brokers, and it's also part of the Iran-Contra thing, which was happening around the same time. And like that's sort of the source. That's the source material for him, is this very personal recollection of like kind of going back to his own neighborhood and seeing it was being taken over by the capitalist class. And I don't want to get off the movie, but like so many of the Nazis that we follow along sort of the main thread of this kind of tell a similar story in superficial details of And then I came back to my neighborhood and these things have changed. And they point to, and then there are suddenly all these immigrants in my hometown, et cetera, and like kind of make it into this like kind of racialized thing. But really the thing they're talking about is like, no, we didn't have the opportunities we used to have, Rust Beltification of like all of middle America, et cetera, et cetera. And so there is this kind of sense of loss, and this loss of something that is very real in your neighborhood. And I will never disagree with that. If you feel like we used to be people who had like some degree of comfort and we could live our lives and, you know, have families, et cetera, et cetera. And now we can't because poverty. That I'm completely on board with you. Blaming the poor immigrant people for that is the problem, because ultimately that's not the issue. The issue is is capitalism, and that's not the juice. That's not the juice. But it's worth noting that Tim Robbins saw that and then built. 7 years later, he makes Bob Roberts about this sort of phenomenon that he has in his personal life, in his real life, about seeing his neighborhood, and that's this sort of genesis of this project, versus these Nazis. And what they do is they see, oh, there are brown people living near me who don't speak my language, and despite the fact that those people are as tormented as any people in my everyday experience, they're the ones that I'm going to blame for the problems in my life. And I think that it speaks to Robbins' experience and like what an actual like sort of like even vaguely leftist, although I think Robbins is himself just more of a New Deal Democrat, but even a vaguely leftist perspective and a systemic perspective gives you the tools you need to sort of understand this phenomenon, as opposed to, you're not as opposed to being preyed upon by demagogues, by racist demagogues, fascist demagogues, right?
Yeah, absolutely. The question of Robin's own politics is interesting. I think the choice to draft Gore Vidal in to represent kind of the antithesis of Bob Roberts is probably quite telling, because Gore Vidal is far from. I can't even remember if he's still alive. He might have died. I can't remember, but Gore Vidal, very acute and non illusioned commentator, I would say, about American politics, and yet, of course, very much of that sort of Camelot Kennedy idealizing, Kennedy Democrat sort of approach to things, and I think that's probably a clue as to where Robbins' sympathy goes. Although I think there's a lot in the film. I mean, I want to give it its due. There's a lot in it that's quite sophisticated for somebody of that kind of left Democrat, normal mainstream left Democrat. I mean, not like DSA persuasion. That there's you have to give the film credit for being quite clear-eyed about a lot of things, like the national security state and the CIA and stuff like that. Well,
it's fun. It's funny that almost anything that even references that gets like bonus points, because like nothing in mainstream film ever references that.
This is it.
Right?
Yeah. It's just not acknowledged.
Gore Vidal died in 2012. I just looked it up just to be sure, but yes,
right.
No.
Yeah, but and another thing, I think you have to give it credit. Like you were mentioning, that a lot of the people you listen to kind of have a similar origin story in terms of their political awakening. Although I would not call it an awakening. To Robbins coming back and finding this gentrification. Well, I mean, we're talking about the crashing wave of neoliberalism, aren't we? At this point in time in the 80s, we're starting to see the late 80s and the 90s. We're starting to see the real beginning of the signs of the long-term effects of the massive shift that's been going on since the 70s. And nevertheless, the film, I mean, again, the film is quite clear-eyed about the fact that there is a common strain between neoliberalism and mainstream reactionary party politics, Republican politics, and then fascism. I mean, this is one of the reasons this is prophetic, is that it shows you how, as indeed we are seeing with Trumpism, genuine fascist movements can grow within mainstream right-wing politics, and how that is directly linked to the economics of neoliberalism. I mean, this is why, although I do think it is kind of crammed in and a bit on the. I mean, this film couldn't be more on the nose if it was a pair of spectacles. But I do kind of appreciate the whole sort of campaign bus also being a Wall Street floor because it does lay it on the line, and yet. Despite the fact that the film sees that very clearly, it predicts fascism growing in that way out of the existing liberal democratic system through the reactionary side of it and its connections to state power and neoliberal finance, etc. It nevertheless remains pretty clear-eyed about the class basis of it, because you have some lines about how Bob plays really well in the depressed areas, and Bob does some lines about how we have to give these people hope, etc., etc. But when the film repeatedly shows you like the poles being pretty much neck and neck, they swing back and forth from a matter of 1-2 points. It's 1 minute Paste is in the lead. Brickley Paste, he's the funny name. He's the Democrat senator who's in office, and then
there are a lot of funny names. Pinchonian, almost funny names, almost as if there was a absolutely. Yeah. But the poles swing back and forth. It's pretty evenly balanced, and what we see of Bob's core support, the actual movement behind him, it's very recognizable. I mean, I don't know about you, but I was watching it on this rewatch, first time I've watched it in ages, and I was looking at like the people camped outside the hospital when he's supposedly in there injured, and the people following him around, and you get like the funny stuff with a very young Jack Black playing this Manson style fan and stuff like that. I'm thinking, look, these look familiar, don't they? I was watching these people storm the Capitol just a little while ago, even down to like dressing up in Revolutionary War uniforms, etc., etc. And the class basis, they're like those three boys that become his obsessive fans and start following him around. They're the mayor's sons, if I remembered rightly. Something like that. Because we're introduced to them.
These are clearly not poor people living in depressed areas. This is a petty bourgeois movement. So, I have to give the film major props for that. It gets an extraordinary amount about the politics right in a way that mainstream movies just don't,
And there's a reason behind that, which you could explicate at some detail and have in the past. Right? Why capitalist production cannot actually encapsulate, a true leftist vision. That said, Jack Black's character and the trench coat mafia, as we might call them, in a slightly different metaphor. It's worth talking about. This is Jack Black's very first film appearance, which I think is interesting because, if you didn't know that was Jack Black, you'd just kind of think, like now we recognize Jack Black. We're not going to get into this, but this is a little bit of you could watch this film 5 times and still not find all of and then that person went on to be super famous, and there are a ton of amazing people in this movie, among which is the woman who plays Leslie Knope's mom on Parks and Recreation is one of the news anchors. And I like to think that this is part of a shared universe in which she left her position as a news anchor, moved to Pawnee, Indiana, became a powerful local elected politician, and then Parks and Recreation exists in the universe in which Bob Roberts is a senator in Pennsylvania. That's how I like to think about this film. Anyway, but Jack Black's character and the trio, I don't remember if it was. I don't remember if it was they're the mayor's, she's the mayor's wife or whatever.
I think that's it.
I would trust that you remember it better than I do, but it is this is a person that you need to meet. This is a person of some kind of power and prestige, and they're literally reviewing footage, which is essentially what campaign ads they're going to run, and hints of the Willie Horton ad in certain bits of that, right? And even the documentarian is kind of coerced into being a part of this process, which is kind of a fascinating
I love
moment.
that bit.
Yeah, where they ask the documentarian, "Do you agree with this?" And then the camera like tilts up and down, which is it's fascinating. It's fascinating.
That's great, because one of the repeated refrains you get from Bob Roberts whenever anybody in the media challenges him is, "You're betraying your responsibilities as a journalist. You're supposed to be objective."
Right.
He says that repeatedly. He says that in the very early scene with the wonderful Lynne Thigpen as an interviewer.
Yeah,
she pops up and then disappears again.
She's amazing. She's amazing.
She's
like
brilliant.
that might be my favorite scene in the movie, honestly. Anyway, continue.
I think my favorite scene might be the bit where the production assistant on the SNL ripoff pulls the electrical cables and stops the show. I think I love that bit. I just want to, I just cheer for that woman.
Oh yeah, no.
No, that is a great little moment, because I mean, very much like Punishment Park. Actually, Punishment Park was interested in the ways in which the documentarian is made complicit, and this is doing something similar, because again, Bob Roberts repeatedly has this refrain to journalists: "You're supposed to be objective," by which he means don't challenge me, be completely neutral, don't point out stuff that I don't like, which is what these people always mean. Again, very acutely observed. And then he's got these people following him around, and they're actually working, I mean, firstly, to hide stuff from them that they don't want them to see, and secondly, to bring them in and try to make them complicit, try to treat them like they're members of the team. And they, as you say, that the bit where the camera nods, I think that's really clever.
Right. And even like, if that's like, well, I'm telling you, I'm nodding the camera as a way of indicating to you that I'm on board so that you'll continue to talk, or what, like there's so much subtext, right? And there are different ways of interpreting it, right? And you can think of that as the documentarian, the cameraman, ultimately, because, the British man who's actually doing the documentary is not the person operating the camera. And so there's someone operating a camera who's just kind of going, yes, I agree, move on, like, fuck off. Or someone agrees. And I think we're allowed a certain degree of ambiguity in that moment, right? And it'd be fascinating if the film did anything with that. But ultimately, again, the film is kind of overstuffed, and it just kind of does the thing and then moves on. But then Bob Roberts meets the mayor's wife, and like her son and his two buddies, who are like just open fucking fascists, right? When they're first introduced, they're doing the Sieg Heil, the Roman salute, but in this kind of lackadaisical way, which is very, very 2016 to me. Like, it's so like, no, we're doing the Sieg Heil, but we're waving. Look, we're waving like it's a thing,
No, Daniel, it's a Roman salute. The fact that the Nazis appropriated it, that's just that makes it very unfair of you to compare.
And even the fact that they're all dressed in like a shirt and tie, like a white shirt and a tie, they have the close cropped haircuts. They didn't quite anticipate the fast haircut with the long on top thing, and then trench coats. Like, that's the thing. If only the Nazis at the Unite the Right rally had thought to buy trench coats. That's the thing they were missing. We would live in a fascist America if only they had thought to buy trench coats, right? And like Jack Black is like, I mean, he's chewing the fucking scenery in this, right? He is pitched too high, but in that way of, that's kind of really adorable, and I love it. It
is bloody funny. The last time you see him, he's just staring. He's basically doing the Kubrick stare. He's copying Vincent D'Onofrio from Full Metal Jacket, and he's just talking in a monotonous voice like a robot, and he's got a Manson style in common with the film.
He's literally got an iron cross on his forehead. Like, what do you want?
The film constantly sort of takes the piss out of... Well, it's not taking the piss out of the 60s. It's taking the piss out of the way these people are obsessed with reacting against the 60s. And in the process, it brings in loads of 60s references, not, Dylan stuff, obviously.
Yeah,
he just looks like Manson at the end, and he's doing it in this robot voice. And the stuff he's saying is just the most... It's just... fascist pap. It's just that he doesn't make you feel guilty about being rich like all these liberals, but he's talking like a robot. I mean, I got to admit, I lolled. I really did.
Oh yeah, sure. No, Jack Black is. I mean, it is like 8 years later he'd go on to do High Fidelity, which Tim Robbins also was a guest star in. He was the boyfriend of the ex-lover who jilted John Cusack, who's also in this movie.
We should
probably talk about that. God, man, maybe that's a two-part. Maybe that's a double header we should watch at some point. Bob Roberts and High Fidelity.
I've never seen High Fidelity. It's another one of those cultural touchstones I've never seen, like Parks and Recreation.
It's pretty bad. High Fidelity is pretty bad, but also worth a watch. Anyway,
it's based on a novel by a British novelist who's
by Nick Hornsby.
Insufferable.
Nick Hornsby, which I've read the novel. Either read the novel or watch the movie. Your preference. Either one. I've read the novel. I've seen the movie. They are very, very similar.
I don't intend to do either because
that's
Hornby
fine.
is just insufferable. But never mind.
Yeah.
Cusack was in a fairly decent movie in the I think in the the War on Terror era called War Inc. Have you ever seen that?
I don't think I've seen that one. Yeah.
No, that's a movie I might. I dare say when I look at it now, I'll be annoyed by it. But at the time, I liked it. That might be something to look at. But
well, we can pick movies to do as bonus episodes. I mean, you can pick the next one if you want. It's fine.
Yeah,
it's fine with me. So, but yeah, Jack Black. There is the implication, I think, that these are the people that murdered the journalist, the indie journalist at the end.
Yeah, because you get the scene where they rampage through the streets and just attack somebody at random. So.
Right. Or like kind of people in their orbit. And this is the kind of thing where I feel like the movie, the limitations of budget and the limitations of production and the limitations of you kind of had one pass at a script and did the thing, kind of let you down because it would be interesting. Like we get like close-up shots. Like we are introduced to the Jack Black character very early and he's like talking directly to the camera, and this is not to the documentarian camera. This is to the like a newscast camera, right? Like a live shot at some scene, and he says, I love Bob Roberts. He is the greatest politician in America and we love him, or whatever. Like it's this very kind of blank stare kind of thing. And yet we don't see anything that justifies like that level of devotion, right? Like we don't see the sort of the backstory. And yet we know at this time in the early 90s, I mean, this is, Ruby Ridge is a year away. Like this is the point at which we know that like Republican politicians, Ron Paul is doing his racist newsletters around this time. Far right politicians are absolutely a wink and a nudge away from legitimate neo-Nazis, right? And that's a thing that I wish we had a little bit more like context on in the film. A thing that I wish was explored more, or at least had like a little bit more perspective on, because we kind of are introduced to this trio and we're given at least the implication that they are involved in the murder of the journalist, and yet it's just kind of a thing that exists in the film. And that's, I mean, ultimately, like, look, this was built on Tim Robbins did a short film about this character and like got SNL to fund it for a few $1,000s in 1986. And then he gets to make the full movie in 1992. And all of the really interesting stuff is kind of in the first 30 minutes in a way, like it's all set up, and it would be nice to see the sort of the finish, like the thing that actually like the movie that actually, lived up to that opening and it really gave this character something to do and really like narrowed down on the two ideas that it really had in its head, as opposed to the 10 that are sort of like represented here. But it's kind of fascinating to see this version. And I do recommend that people listening to this should see this movie. If you haven't seen this movie, you should check it out. And I will tell you how to check it out here at the end. So, Yeah.
Oh yeah, I mean, we've been fairly critical, I think, but I would say I'm very critical of it within the context of thinking it's generally pretty great.
Yeah.
I'm less impressed with it now maybe than way back when, but yeah, it's pretty good, pretty damn good. Like on the specific point with those three young fellas, I think the background to that is meant to be basically that they come from a family of Christian fascists. Because
which was a total thing in '92.
Oh yeah,
in '92, the sort of the Jerry Falwell era of Republican politics was the height of it ultimately. So yeah, no, absolutely. Sorry, not trying to interrupt, just agreeing with you. Yes, please continue.
No, that's fine, because you get that line from the mayor's wife, their mother, or the mother of one of them at least. I'm not entirely sure. I thought they were all brothers, but maybe not. But about
they all play guitar and they're in a band together, and that's all you really need to know, right?
Yeah. But she's okay with them listening to his music, even though the guitar is the instrument of the devil or something like that.
Right.
So,
and she even listens to Bob Roberts' music when she's alone. And
don't tell my husband.
Don't tell my husband. And wow.
So these kids, they come from
what a moment! Like what a moment in cinema history that is. Like Jesus kids, Christ.
They come from a background where if they were ever caught listening to Nirvana, there'd be an exorcism or something.
Right. And yeah, I just
not
like
that they would.
I am not disinclined to believe that any person should be punished for masturbating at all. That is perfectly fine with me. The idea of that woman sitting and masturbating to Bob Roberts records fills me with a slight distaste, shall we say.
Oh, I see. I didn't get that. I genuinely, innocent that I am, I genuinely didn't get that.
Yeah, no. Sometimes I listen to them when I'm alone, when my husband isn't around. Oh, Jerry Lewis like tugging on his collar moment. Yeah, that's that. I think that's the intended message there. But
I see. Yeah. Well, thank you for opening up a new and slightly disturbing vista in a movie that I thought I knew.
Or maybe I just have the filthier mind than anyone involved with making this film. It's entirely possible. It's very likely. It's very likely that I do have the dirtier mind. Anyway, please continue.
Well, I don't know. I feel like I've said most of it, to be honest. I think I want to give this film. I mean, that again is an example of the thing we were talking about. You get the throwaway line that suggests the deal with this family is that they are extreme Christian fascists, right? And it's funny, but it's a throwaway line, and it's in there because it's another thing that Tim Robbins wants to get in because it's part of his overall thesis. It's because the film is basically like a thesis statement. As I was saying, you don't really need to explicate it at all. It just tells you what it thinks, and it's like it's got a checklist of things that it needs to mention. The NSA, Christian fascism, etc. And it's got to put them all in. So what you get is that. And it's funny, and it's necessary to talk about that, and it's a real thing, etc., but it doesn't go any further than that, and you just get this feel like the tick box has been ticked, But I think for all that, I want to give it credit for getting so much right. It gets the essential fascistic potential within even mainstream right-wing politics. It gets that right. It gets the neoliberalism thing right. It's correct about talking about things that just aren't mentioned elsewhere, like the national security state and their involvement in coups abroad and their involvement in drugs, while hypocritically covering it in the war on drugs. It gets the racism of the war on drugs. It gets the racism of right-wing politics through dog whistles. It gets all this stuff. And the whole maneuver of the rebel conservative, the obsession of American reactionary politics from the 80s onwards with countering and rubbishing and opposing and blackening the 60s, of neoliberalism as a cultural counter-revolution, and the absolute obsession of the American reactionaries with and the establishment generally with like countering stuff like the Vietnam syndrome and the cultural legacies of the 60s that's still going on. It's all in there. So while at the same time you're watching it and you're not really you're not really watching anything very coherent or anything that's very satisfying as a story, and it does feel a bit jumbled and a bit crammed in. At the same time, as the movie goes down that checklist I was talking about, I'm kind of watching it do that, and I'm thinking, well, yeah, you're right. I mean, that's another thing. That's not something I'd hear about somewhere else. Well,
and a thing that's made in 1992 has all these things on its mind, which just illustrates how much was kind of left out of the conversation at that time. And again, if we had been talking about this stuff in 1992, if we had this conversation for real, and that had impacted Democratic politics, like Democratic Party politics, maybe we wouldn't have gone the DNC route. Maybe Clinton doesn't get elected. Maybe we have a better candidate. Maybe, with all of the flaws of electoral politics, and I'm not trying to pretend that would make everything right or anything, but maybe we wouldn't be in this situation had Clinton not doubled down on all that shit as a way of maintaining his own political power during his first term. I think there's a moment in this interview that Tim Robbins did that, again, everyone listening to this should read. It's a fascinating interview, but apparently on one of the talk shows, because this came out a few weeks before the 1992 election, and in one of the interviews, he apparently implied, there's also a lot of Bob Roberts and Bill Clinton. And,
it would have been nice if that had made it into the film, Tim.
Well, yeah, but if he's producing that in 1991 or whatever, it's kind of hard to know because Bill Clinton wasn't the candidate until April 1992. I'm going to give him
It's not like that problem with the Democratic Party began with Bill Clinton,
Well, let's put a pin in that. I'm going to come back to that in a second, right? But to say that this is kind of a two-party problem, or to say that this is a problem that transcends it's not a phenomenalistic problem. It's a systemic problem. I think is kind of lost by just sort of the very process of making a film of this kind, right? Because the whole thing is, we make a film, and a film has to be about personalities. It has to be about people. You point a camera at someone doing something, and you're trying to implicate something based on that. And it's very hard to kind of talk about systems in that format. It's kind of built into cinema and cinematic language. And unless you're fucking Eisenstein, it's very hard to transcend that. I'm not trying to justify Robbins and all that sort of thing, but it is just sort of the nature of.
I agree with what you're saying. Just briefly, I agree with what you're saying, and I think Bob Roberts does better than most other political films I can think of. It sacrifices some things that we've talked about in return for that, but it does, even within what Peter Watkins we talked about before, what he talks about as the monoform. This is still sort of within that, and it does a pretty good job of talking about systemic problems, and I think that's maybe why you then notice where it falls down when it just fails to cover another part of the systemic problem, like the Democratic Party.
Well, and this is the other thing, which again in the interview I should I wish you had been able to read it ahead of time, and we could have talked about this in a little bit more detail. I only found it a few hours ago, but it is an interview in which Robbins kind of was interviewed about the process of the movie, right? And one of the things that he says is part of the origin was kind of the idea was to contrast this Bob Roberts character with an old school Democratic politician who had lost his way, right? Who had kind of come in the early days full of vim and vigor, trying to work for the working class, and had been kind of corrupted by the process. And there's one scene that no one who talks about this film talks about, and so we're going to talk about it right now, and that is in the hearings of the Alan Rickman character. And we have not even talked about fucking Alan Rickman is in this movie, because he is the reason this movie got made, as Tim Robbins indicates in the interview. They needed another star. Tim Robbins was a star because he was in The Player, and he had a couple other things. but they needed one more star, and they cast Alan Rickman 2 weeks before the movie was about to start filming. And so Alan Rickman is in the movie, and that's why this movie got made. In case you wonder about capitalist production of films, and
so this movie happened because of Robin Hood, Prince of Thieves,
and Die Hard. He was coming off of Die Hard, So Alan Rickman decides, I'm going to do this, then they'll give you a few $1 million to make it happen. Anyway, there's a scene, there's a sequence, again in the first 30 minutes, in which it's a Senate hearing in which Bradley Page is questioning Alan Rickman, and I forget the name of his character, but he's questioning Alan Rickman's character.
Lucas Hart III.
Lucas Hart III, yes. About his, about the drug running, and about the downed plane, et cetera, et cetera. And so you get a scene in which there is some kind of harsh questioning, and Lucas Hart III, indignant, pounds his fist on the table and, does the crocodile tears and whatever, and says,
yep.
I am indignant. I am indignant that you would think that I would be that. We were only trying to help people, et cetera, et cetera. And then you cut away to another news segment, and then come back. And Bradley Page is saying, well, we do deeply apologize to Mr. Hart III for impugning on his character, et cetera, et cetera. And we think he is a good man, or kind of whatever is actually being said there. I didn't quote the actual thing. But the point being, within the system, he is required to do that. And whether Page in the film is meant to believe that, or whether he's forced to believe that by the structure, is left unsaid, because we don't spend enough time with him, because the movie isn't that. It doesn't have the ability to be that because of various factors. But I think this is the thing that even our hero in the film, the New Deal Democrat, whose politics are kind of fundamentally broken to begin with, but who would be a much better person to be kind of in the system, is ultimately also complicit in the forgiveness of these war crimes. And this is never referenced anywhere else in the film. It's a little moment. It's 90 seconds in the overall movie, but I think it really portends both what the movie could have been and what it fails to be in a weird way.
Yeah, no, that's really good. I don't think it's actually Paste that makes that speech, is it? I think it's somebody else on the committee. But Paste is shown sitting there silent. He's obviously not happy about it, but he is, as you say, complicit. And what that shows, I think, is the guy just, he knows better. He's been leading the aggressive questioning. He obviously knows better. But there he is on the committee, and in the end, he just has to sit there while the leader of the committee, or the chairman or whatever, just lets the guy off and apologizes, and he doesn't really do anything about it. And the other thing, of course, is that, Paste has all this nice rhetoric. I mean, it's, Bob Roberts kind of has a point, doesn't he, when he's talking to the voting public, and he's saying, these problems still exist. He's couching it in the way that's designed to appeal to his base and his audience through that worldview, which is, why can't you get ahead? Why can't you have a nice car? Why can't you have a holiday? Well, you can vote for me, and I'll take the social programs away from the lazy scroungers, etc. But he is talking about deep social problems that Brickley Paste, for all his lovely Camelot and New Deal Democrat politics and his clear, disillusionment in the good sense of disillusionment about the world, he's been in that senatorial seat for a very long time, and he hasn't got it done. Nothing's happened, to the point where the same social problems that he is aware of and complains about and talks nicely about, if we work together and we make sacrifices, I do believe we can how long has he been talking like that? And those same social problems, they've just continued to linger and fester, haven't they? And it's almost like Bob Roberts is kind of like the ultimate punishment on Brickley Paste for just, trying and failing within the confines of this fundamentally limited vision. But I think that's a good way to read the film. But I think that's us reading the film against itself to an extent, because
Yeah,
I do think the film
think
presents Brickley Paste as a voice of moral authority, doesn't it?
I think the film, and this is, again, not to try to give the film or Robbins or whatever, kind of undue credit. I do think that this is another case in which the sort of the production of the film butts up against the sort of like what they're trying to say, because I think there is a kind of a two-part thing with the Paste character, right? In which they're both trying to present him as like someone who has the right ideas, who is sort of like morally just, at least in terms of sort of the two-party politics. He's the better choice, obviously, than Bob Roberts. Like, of course, hold your nose and vote for the best. But also they give Gore Vidal the ability to sort of speak his mind in terms of his real politics. Like, a lot of those sequences in which Gore Vidal is speaking in the movie are just, them pointing a camera at him and going, just answer the questions as you would yourself. Like, they weren't pre-scripted. And so we are kind of getting like sort of the idealism of a Vidal who doesn't have to answer to voters, as opposed to sort of kind of a structural critique. And a lot of that does there is a paradox there, and there is a dichotomy there. But I think it's also kind of built into, this was made in 4 weeks. And I think you look at this movie, it doesn't look like it's made in 4 weeks. I mean, it is well produced. It is, within the confines of what it does. But ultimately, the failures almost speak to the problems of kind of dealing within the system as a filmmaker in a way. And again, that's not to defend Robbins or to defend the product as much as to say, like, imagine what the good version of this could be, right?
Yeah, and I think one very simple thing, I mean, I hate to say it, because I think Vidal is very good in the film and I have a lot of admiration for Vidal, but I think one very, very quick and easy way to partly remedy the problem there would be to just cast somebody else as that character, somebody less impressive, because Vidal is, firstly, he's Gore fucking Vidal, and secondly, he's a charismatic figure. It's a strange thing to say about somebody who's so sort of calm and slow and quiet, but he's got that voice and that face, etc. And imagine if Brickley Paste was played by, I'm trying to think of an alternative, but you can picture the sort of actor I'm imagining, in that role.
Bradley Whitford shows up and he's Paste. Sure.
Yeah. Or the guy that played the cigarette smoking man in the X-Files. Sure. Somebody who looks tired and exhausted and dead inside and kind of ineffective. Somebody like that.
I agree. So somebody just kind of going through the motions ultimately. Again, I think I mentioned at the beginning of this that this would be one, like, I'm generally opposed to the 30 years later remake or sequel. Apparently there is news that King of the Hill might get a 30 years later sequel in which it takes place 12 years after the end of the original. And
wow,
I imagine an adult Bobby Hill as like a father in 2021.
I was just going to say, I'm very nervous about that, because if they get Bobby wrong, I'll be very upset.
No. Bobby is one of the most amazing characters in TV history, and fuck you if you get it wrong. I really hope Greg Daniels has a greater influence. Honestly, I would just love, like the fact that news comes out and I'm just like, this could be really good. Like, this might be one of the big things that might actually work, but more likely it's going to be complete shit. And I don't want to shit on the history of King of the Hill, but on the possibility that it's good, I'll kind of shrug my shoulders and go,
it could be it could be a Twin Peaks: The Return. You never know. It could be good.
But, I think Bob Roberts might be another property that I could see Tim Robbins coming back in 2021 and, doing a version of this character and saying, Yeah, I worked in the Senate for 12 years, and look at all the accomplishments I made, and like kind of look at the way that media and the way that this sort of like inoperability of the legislative branch of the government stymied his efforts in a way. Despite politics kind of moving in his direction. I think a 3 Decades Later sequel could be really interesting, and I would like Tim Robbins to do that if he chooses to.
He should just do what he wants to do. Good old Tim.
Good old. I mean, he's a New Deal Democrat, but that's way better.
Hey, there's worse.
I mean, look, if every Democrat in the Senate was a New Deal Democrat, we'd be in a much better place. So yes, please.
Yeah. Yeah. No, I mean, he made Dead Man Walking and Cradle Will Rock. He's got some credit with me. Those are good movies.
And Arlington Road, which he only...
which I literally just remembered that and scribbled it down as a possible bonus episode, because that's an interesting movie as well.
I actually haven't seen that movie, so we need to
really?
do that,
oh, well, yeah.
Yeah, no.
I have seen that one, and that's quite... I don't think it's good exactly, but I think it's interesting to talk about.
Sure, no. I remember seeing the trailers at the time and thinking, well, that looks interesting because I love Tim Robbins, because I loved Shawshank Redemption, and then, never saw it in the last 20 years. And that's probably the way most people who were alive at the time experienced that movie. So,
I expect so, yeah. I don't remember it setting the world on fire.
No, it didn't. But
I don't know. If you've got anything else you want to talk about, the only bit that kind of suggests itself to me as a possible avenue of conversation is the pseudo SNL bit, where Bob is invited on as a guest to, what's it called, Cutting Edge?
Cutting Edge Live, which I think is, at least in name, a reference to Spitting Image. But, it's very clearly SNL.
It's a pretty generic sort of satire show name, isn't it?
It's a pretty generic satire show, and it's very clearly SNL. It's very, very clearly SNL. To the point of having, really stupid bits and inside jokes that only if you are... Tim Robbins shows up, and Bob Balaban is the, what's his name? Lorne Michaels figurehead. Yeah. And he's literally going oh, I love the thing with the line. And and then everybody laughs because it's the inside thing. It's the thing that was going on SNL in 1992 or whatever. This is it's the Hans and Franz of that show. And if you're not involved in the SNL lore, and SNL was, it's funny to think that even in 1990, SNL was 15 years old, right? Even then it was kind of maybe this show is showing its seams and maybe it should end. Maybe that would be the good thing. And then 31 years later, we're still
trotting it out.
We still have to have it exist. Why? But it is interesting to see it is kind of making fun of SNL, despite the fact that the bit started on SNL, and in fact, Tim Robbins went on.
I think it's savage.
Oh no, it's savage to SNL. Yeah.
But very, very much in contrast to what that ridiculous thing Aaron Sorkin did about the
Studio 60 show. Yeah, which I never watched because I don't watch anything. It's fine. Yeah, no. It's savage. It does kind of do the. And then one of the actresses just goes and pulls all the plugs, and suddenly they can't do the show anymore. It's a great bit, but it's she ruined her career to spend 90 seconds in with a test pattern or whatever. I don't know. It feels like the better version would be she's convinced out of it by Bob Balaban or whatever, right? Look, I understand,
the bleaker but more realistic version is she's bullied or convinced out of it. Yeah, right. Pressured.
Look, I understand
to smother her convictions. Yeah,
and also the giant...
very much the way the host played by John Cusack has been. I mean, he's obviously sort of attacking with the bit he does, they say, "Oh, you can't do that; it's self-hating." The routine he does about SNL itself. But he's not quitting his job. He's doing it within the ultimately, this guy is not going to walk away. This guy is going to make his little protest and make his little noise, and then he's going to say, "Well, I did what I could. I spoke up, but." He's not going to quit the show or anything like that.
And he would get accolades within, sort of at least today on like a, liberal Twitter. It'd be like, I'm here, I'm the guy.
Colbert doing the White House Correspondents' Dinner and chaffing Bush about weapons of mass
destruction. Not even on
that makes a fucking difference.
Not even on that level, but like the sort of, imagine, the Imagine video that happened at the beginning of COVID, and so many like liberals kind of going like, "Oh, this is great," isn't this phenomenal? I mean, I don't know. I have a residual appreciation for the Stuart Colbert era Bush years because it meant a lot to me at the time, and that's about all you got in the U.S. at that time, unless you were like deeply involved in leftist politics. And so, I grant them a lot of slack, but really I shouldn't.
For old time's sake.
But also Colbert is very bad. Colbert is very, very bad. And all you have to do is look at the fact that Kamala Harris went on his show and he asked her the question, "Well, what did you mean? You are now trying to be Joe Biden's VP, and yet you called him out for his position on segregation back in the day." And she goes, "It was a debate. What do you want?" And he's like, "Oh yeah, that's great. I understand. It's fine."
Yeah.
Wah, wah.
Of course, nothing matters or means anything, and there's no such thing as principles, and you don't really care about him being involved in. Yeah, of course,
And it's a media environment which Bob Roberts would wholly succeed. Imagine Ted Cruz, but with charisma. That's kind of no, and no. We're all terrified for that. So
we're winding up now, I think. But I do want to mention in connection with the SNL bit, maybe my favorite bit of the entire movie, the bit that made me just clops when I watched it this time. There's one of the most brilliant things in the movie is that Bob's wife is there throughout the entire thing, and she's a total non-character. She's just this complete smiling waxwork sort of blonde politician wife robot thing. She's barely got any lines of dialogue. The lines of dialogue she does have are like reading a child's letter to Bob or whatever, and she's just presented as completely blank, like a Stepford wife, But there is this little bit when they arrive at the studio. Bob Roberts is talking to the comedians or the writers or whatever, and he says, I can't remember what her name is. I think it's Polly. Polly loves something that they do. It's obviously one of those running jokes you were talking about, something to do with lobsters. And it's just a passing, you don't think it means anything. It's just a bit of bullshit he's giving them or something. But after the bit where the production assistant pulls the cables out and blanks the screen and he storms out after being apologized to by Bob Balaban as pseudo Lorne Michaels and all that, you get this bit, just as the camera's following them, there's just this throwaway bit where you hear Bob Roberts say, "Where's Polly?" And somebody says to him, "Oh, she stayed to watch the lobsters." Which I think is fucking genius.
Yeah. No, it's great. It's great. No, I'm with you. I don't even remember that bit, but I believe you that it exists and it sounds hilarious. So apparently I get to rewatch at least 5 minutes of Bob Roberts before I go to bed tonight. That's lovely. And I think that's a good place to end it. This is a good movie. Jack and I have spent a lot of time criticizing it, but we criticize it because it's very good. This is the criticism you get by making something that is interesting and intricate, that is doing something that is worth doing, but that fails on some levels, and like this is we're engaging the film in conversation as opposed to trashing it, which I don't think either of us are trying to say don't watch the film, or the film is actively encouraging some like kind of awful politics or whatever. Like, this is an interesting film. It is worth watching. It's very much a thing that if you want to understand the politics of pre-internet era U.S. electoralism, you should check it out. It is absolutely worth your time. That's my opinion anyway.
Totally agreed.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah,
I totally agree. I think it would be better if it was 4 hours long and all the color was drained out. And
Yeah.
Po-faced, and
I would actually recommend, if you're going to watch it alongside the documentary The War Room, which was released in 1993, and which was I think it's like barely 90 minutes documentary that had deep inside access to the Clinton campaign, and like compare and contrast the sort of fictionalized version that Tim Robbins is presenting, as opposed to the kind of actual real life version of the person who became the president. Looking back at that in 2021, really fascinating 2-part series. I don't know. Have you seen The War Room?
I haven't. No, it's yet another thing I haven't seen.
Nobody remembers it because the world is terrible. But yeah. Anyway,
I need to get on that, obviously.
Yeah. So we should thank people. I have had, and I want to make sure this is said, and I wanted to put this at the beginning of the episode, but we'll do it at the end. If you're listening to this shortly after it's released, then you are a Patreon subscriber of one or the both of us. And
a backer, yeah.
A backer. And I cannot thank you enough. I had severe, if you listen to the last episode, the Slate Star Codex episode, you can tell that there were some issues with the recording of that episode. And that was my laptop was slowly dying, and it has been slowly dying for a while. And ultimately it affected my ability to even record that episode. And I do apologize for that. But my laptop died. And I have upgraded my setup, and now we have a much better setup. And I spent about $700 on computer equipment in the last week, and I could not have done that without your support. And it's going to mean much, much better stuff in the future in terms of our ability to produce content. And
yeah. It's going to mean we can do things like play clips of Heather Heying being awful and kind of stop them and talk about what she's saying as she's saying it. And that'll be a lot of fun.
And believe me, I spent that money not on like one really nice piece of equipment, but like discount hardware that I got off of like various places. Like, I shopped around and I do my own like customization, et cetera, et cetera. In other words, your dollars went as far as I could possibly make them go. One of these days I will drop like $3,000 on a really nice system, but today is not that day. So, thank you to all our backers. This episode is like, given what my laptop was doing a week ago, this podcast would have ceased to exist very quickly without your backing, because I just would not have been able to record. And, I make a lower middle class living with my day job. I am comfortable. I have air conditioning, et cetera, et cetera. I'm not going to ask anyone who does not have the ability to support me for any kind of money, but $1 a month really does help, and it really does make this show better and keeps it going. So if you value it, please contribute to myself or to Jack or both, because this does cost both of us money on a continuing basis, and thank you for your support.
Yeah, echoed very much. That was I Don't Speak German. Thanks for listening. If you enjoyed the show or found it useful, please spread the word. If you want to contact me, I'm @_Jack_Graham_. Daniel is @Daniel E. Harper, and the show's Twitter is @IDSGpod. If you want to help us make the show and stay 100% editorially independent, we both have Patreons. I Don't Speak German is hosted at idon'tspeakgerman.libsyn.com, and we're also on Apple Podcasts, SoundCloud, Spotify, Stitcher, and we show up in all podcast apps. This show is associated with Eruditorum Press, where you can find more details about it. The music was by Lynne the Band.